She crashed into his truck on a Tuesday morning, and she did not know that the man standing 6 feet away from her, holding a manila envelope against his ribs, was carrying the last secret her dead father ever told anyone. The truck was a 2004 Chevy Silverado, white with a rust line running the length of the passenger side like a wound the paint had stopped trying to cover. It was parked legally, backed into the last space in the visitor lot of the Wentworth and Ferris law offices on Drayton Street in Savannah, Georgia. The engine was off. The driver was inside the building, and the silver Porsche Cayenne that came around the corner too fast, phone in her left hand, latte balanced against the steering wheel in her right, struck the rear quarter panel hard enough to knock the tailgate latch loose and send the truck sliding 3 inches sideways across the asphalt. The woman who stepped out of the Porsche did not look at his truck first. She looked at the scratch on her own bumper, ran her thumb across it. Then she turned and studied the Silverado, the rust, the dented toolbox bolted behind the cab, the child's booster seat visible through the rear window, faded cover, and a juice box straw poking from the cup holder. She photographed his license plate and called the police. When the man walked out of the law office 6 minutes later, holding that envelope and a set of keys that were not his, she was already talking. "You need to move this," she said, gesturing at the truck as if it had parked itself there just to inconvenience her. He looked at the damage. He looked at her. He tucked the envelope under his arm and said nothing. She stepped closer. Phone raised now. Recording. The camera aimed directly at his face. "I have called the police," she said. "I have your plate. This lot is not public parking." He reached into his jacket pocket slowly and pulled out a visitor parking pass stamped by the front desk at Wentworth and Ferris. He held it up. He did not hand it to her. He simply held it where the camera could see it, then lowered it and put it back in his pocket. She had not asked his name. She had not asked if anyone was hurt. She had not looked at the angle of the damage or considered that her Porsche was the one facing into his lane. She had asked for the truck to be moved, and she had already told the 911 dispatcher that an abandoned vehicle had caused an accident in a private lot. He stood very still. The envelope pressed tight against his ribs. Inside it was a letter, handwritten, dated 11 days before the death of a man whose name this woman carried on her driver's license, her trusts, her buildings, and the brass plaque on the Children's Hospital 6 blocks south. But she did not know that yet. Before we go any further, I want to ask you something. Drop your city in the comments. Tell me where you are watching from, because this story is going to sit with you for a while, and I want to know who is carrying it. If you have not subscribed yet, now is the time. Hit that button, ring the bell. Because what this man was holding in that envelope is something her family had been searching for since the day her father died, and she just rear-ended the only person on earth who knew where it was. His name was Solomon Price. He had been a private fiduciary for 22 years. Most people never hear that word unless someone dies with money and complexity in equal measure. A fiduciary holds the bridge between a dead person's wishes and the living people those wishes are meant to reach. Not an executor exactly, not a trustee. Something quieter than both. A fiduciary is appointed by the court to manage a specific set of instructions left behind by the deceased. Instructions too sensitive, too contested, or too important to be handled by the family's own attorneys. The court needs someone with no stake in the outcome, someone whose only loyalty belongs to the document and the dead. Solomon did not manage investment portfolios. He did not trade stocks or advise on tax shelters. He managed the last instructions of people who had spent their lives building something and wanted to make sure it survived the people who would try to reshape it once they were gone. Wills with unusual provisions, trusts with charitable redirections the beneficiaries knew nothing about. Bequests written in language so specific that a single misplaced clause could send millions into the wrong hands or the wrong decade. He had been appointed by probate courts in 4 states. He carried a fiduciary license most practicing attorneys did not know existed, and he worked almost exclusively alone. He had not chosen this work. It had chosen him. 24 years earlier, Solomon was a second-year law student at Mercer University in Macon, clerking for a probate judge named Harlan Osgood. Judge Osgood handled the estates of families whose names appeared on street signs and hospital wings, and the donor walls of churches built before the Civil War. He was 71 and careful, the kind of man who read every page of a trust document 3 times before signing, who kept a magnifying glass on his desk not because his eyes were failing, but because he believed small print deserved the same attention as large. He saw in Solomon something most people missed entirely, not brilliance, not ambition, patience. The particular kind that comes not from having no options, but from understanding that silence, properly held, reveals what speech never will. Solomon could sit in a room with a grieving widow and 3 hostile attorneys and say nothing for 45 minutes and leave that room knowing more than everyone who had spoken. On his last day of clerking, Judge Osgood told him something he had never forgotten. "The dead do not get to change their minds, Solomon. The living will try to change it for them. Your job is to make sure nobody rewrites a dead man's last clear thought." Solomon graduated, passed the Georgia bar on his first attempt. He did not go into litigation. He did not chase corporate law or join a firm with his name above the door. He went into fiduciary work because he understood that someone had to sit between the living and the dead and hold the line. And he knew most people who took that job treated it as a stepping stone to something louder. Solomon did not want louder. He wanted the work. By 35, he had managed the estate transfers of 11 families across Georgia and South Carolina, including 3 whose combined assets exceeded $400 million. He was not wealthy. He was paid a flat administrative fee set by the court, reviewed annually, and he lived accordingly. The Silverado, bought used in 2011 from a retired electrician in Pooler who kept the maintenance records in a shoebox. A 3-bedroom house on Wilshire Road in Savannah's Midtown, white clapboard, green shutters, a porch that needed repainting, and a backyard just large enough for a swing set his daughter had nearly outgrown, but had not yet told him she was done with. A savings account that would cover her college tuition at a state school if nothing else changed between now and then. Iris was 7. She had her mother's hands, long fingers, wide palms, the kind that wrapped all the way around a glass of milk when she held it with both. She had her mother's habit, too, tilting her head to the left when she heard something she was not sure she believed. The gesture was so precise in its replication that Solomon sometimes had to look away when she did it because it arrived without warning and carried the full weight of a woman who was no longer in the room. Her mother, Nadine, had played cello in the Savannah Philharmonic second chair for 6 seasons. She was not famous. She was consistent, which in an orchestra is worth more. She played with a physical stillness that made the movement of her bow arm look almost involuntary, as if the music were pulling it rather than the other way around. She died on a Tuesday morning in March. An aneurysm that arrived without symptoms and ended without negotiation. Iris was at school learning to count by 5s. Solomon was in a courthouse 40 minutes away reviewing a trust amendment for a client who had died the previous Thursday. He received the call from Memorial Health at 11:14. He was in the car by 11:15. He arrived too late by approximately 90 minutes. He did not talk about Nadine the way people expected. He did not keep photographs on the mantle or play her recordings on the anniversary of her death. He kept one thing, a tuning fork, a 440, silver, slightly tarnished at the tines. She had carried it in her cello case for every rehearsal and every performance since she was 19. It sat on the kitchen windowsill above the sink, between a small clay pot with a crack in the rim and the salt shaker. Every morning while the coffee brewed, Solomon picked it up, struck it once against the heel of his hand, listened to the tone decay, set it back down. He did not close his eyes. He did not pause. He simply listened to the one note that had been constant in her life and let it ring in his kitchen the way it had rung in practice rooms and concert halls for years before he ever met her. Iris had watched him do this so many times that she believed it was simply what adults did in the morning, like checking the weather or putting on shoes. She had never asked what the fork was for. Solomon had decided that when she finally did, he would tell her everything. Their mornings followed the same pattern. coffee for him in a blue ceramic mug with a chip on the handle, oatmeal for Iris with exactly 4 banana slices because 5 was too many and 3 was not a pattern. She had explained this distinction to him once with complete seriousness, and he had never questioned it. He drove her to Hodge Elementary in the Silverado, and she always asked him to park in the second space from the entrance. The first was too close. The last was too far. She carried a backpack slightly too large for her that she refused to replace because it had a patch on the front pocket shaped like a whale. Nadine had sewn it on the summer before she died. Iris did not know that. She thought it came with the backpack. Solomon had never corrected this. He worked from a rented office on Bull Street, a single room above a framing shop, a desk, a filing cabinet that locked with a key he wore on a lanyard around his neck when he was inside the building. A framed copy of his original fiduciary appointment letter from the Chatham County Probate Court signed by Judge Osgood in blue ink. He had no associates, no paralegals. He had a colleague named Yvette Simmons who handled fiduciary cases out of Charleston. They had known each other since a continuing education seminar in Columbia 12 years earlier. Yvette was 58, meticulous, and the only person outside his family who had attended Nadine's memorial service without being invited. She had simply appeared, sat in the third row, stayed through the reception, eaten a plate of food, and left without requiring Solomon to say a single word about how he was doing. That was the foundation of their professional friendship. She understood that some things did not need to be discussed in order to be honored. The case that brought Solomon to the Wentworth and Ferris office that morning, the case that put his truck in that parking lot at the exact moment the Porsche came around the corner, was the estate of Lionel Andrew Maddox. Lionel Maddox had been one of the most significant commercial real estate developers in the southeastern United States by any measure the business world uses to rank human beings. He had built or financed 31 mixed-use developments across Georgia, Florida, and the Carolinas over 4 decades, office parks in Buckhead, retail corridors along the I-16 corridor, a waterfront project in Charleston that won 3 architectural awards and displaced an entire neighborhood of families who had lived there since Reconstruction. He donated the land and the first $40 million for the Maddox Children's Pavilion at Memorial Health. He had a foundation with a staff of 19, a board that met quarterly in a conference room overlooking the Savannah River, and a daughter named Catherine, his only surviving heir, who stood to inherit a trust valued at approximately $1.6 billion upon the resolution of his estate. Catherine Maddox was 44, graduate degree in nonprofit management from Emory. She sat on the boards of 3 charitable organizations and chaired the Maddox Foundation's Giving Committee. She lived in her father's house on Isle of Hope, a property assessed at $11 million that overlooked a marsh where herons stood in the shallows every morning like sentinels. By most public accounts, she was a thoughtful and serious woman who had spent her adult life managing the complexity of being Lionel Maddox's only child. A careful public grace that masked a private grief she had not yet fully reckoned with. That grief was not only about her father's death. It was about the distance that had grown between them in his final years, the conversations they had stopped having, the questions she never asked because she assumed there would always be time. Lionel had begun pulling away in the last 3 years of his life, not dramatically, not visibly, but in the small withdrawals that daughters notice and cannot name. He stopped calling on Sunday mornings, stopped asking about the foundation's quarterly reports, attended the last 2 board meetings by phone, and then stopped attending altogether. She told herself it was his health. She told his doctors it was depression. She told no one that she was afraid it was something else entirely, something that had to do with the business itself and with decisions he had made decades ago that she had only recently begun to understand. She was right about that fear, but she did not know it on the morning she hit Solomon's truck. What she knew that morning was that the processing of her father's estate, which should have been straightforward given the clarity of the existing trust documents, had been delayed for 9 months by a sealed fiduciary review that no one at Wentworth and Ferris could explain to her. She had been told a court-appointed fiduciary was reviewing supplemental materials, not what those materials were, not who the fiduciary was. She had filed 3 motions to unseal the review. All 3 denied by the probate judge without explanation. She arrived at the parking lot that morning already furious, late, holding a latte she had not yet tasted, on the phone with the foundation's executive director discussing a gala she could not properly plan because the estate's liquid assets were frozen. She came around the corner and hit the white truck, and the latte went across the dashboard, and her frustration found its target. The escalation did not stop in the parking lot. Over the following 3 weeks, Catherine did what people with resources and grievance and a specific kind of certainty about the order of things will do when that order feels violated. She filed a property damage claim that overstated the cost of the Porsche's repair by $11,000, sent a letter to the Wentworth and Ferris managing partner asking why non-clients were permitted to use the firm's lot, describing Solomon's truck in language that did not name his race but made the implication legible. She retained a private investigator named Gary Lott for 6 days to confirm that Solomon's Silverado had been photographed at the lot on multiple prior occasions. Lott found it had been there 4 times in 2 months, always during business hours, always in the visitor section. Catherine forwarded this to the building security company and asked that the plate be flagged for trespass. She went to the property management office at the Oglethorpe Professional Building where Solomon's Bull Street office was located and asked the manager what kind of business Solomon ran. The manager, bound by his lease agreement, told her politely that he could not help her. She stood in the hallway for a moment after he closed the door. Then she walked back to her car. She was not doing these things because she was cruel. She was doing them because she was a woman caught in a loss she had not processed, watching her father's estate held hostage by a process she could not penetrate, and she had decided on that morning when she was already late and already angry and already carrying 3 years of unanswered questions that the man with the old truck and the manila envelope was the simplest available target for everything she could not control. She had spent her entire adult life in rooms where she was the most important person present. She had never been in a room where she was the least informed. Solomon knew this. He had seen it before in other estates, other families. Grief does strange things to people accustomed to having answers. It makes them reach for control in places where control does not belong. He did not take Catherine's behavior personally. He took it professionally, documented every interaction, forwarded every letter to Yvette, continued his work at the same measured pace he brought to everything. The work, in this case, was the letter. Lionel Maddox had written it in the final 11 days of his life, on cream stationery from the Planters Inn in downtown Savannah, the hotel where he had stayed on his first business trip to the city 46 years earlier. The handwriting was cramped and uneven, letters leaning in different directions on different lines, the product of hands weakened by peripheral neuropathy that had been stealing his fine motor control for 2 years. But the language was precise. The sentences were complete. The intention was unmistakable. Solomon knew what the letter said because Lionel Maddox had given it to him personally. In a room at Candler Hospital, monitors beeping their flat rhythms and the oxygen line taped to his nose, Lionel had asked the hospital chaplain to find him a fiduciary with no connection to his family's legal team. The chaplain, a man named David Boateng who had been at Candler for 14 years and who knew every attorney and judge in the county because he had sat with their parents while they died, called Judge Osgood. Judge Osgood, retired by then but still answering his phone on the first ring, called Solomon. Solomon drove to Candler at 9 that evening, parked the Silverado in the hospital's east lot, took the elevator to the 4th floor, sat in a chair beside Lionel Maddox's bed for 2 hours and 14 minutes. He listened, took notes on a yellow legal pad, asked 4 questions, all procedural. When Lionel finished speaking, he handed Solomon the letter in a sealed envelope and asked him to ensure it reached the probate court in a form that could not be challenged. Solomon accepted it, placed it in his filing cabinet, did not open it until the morning Lionel Maddox died, 4 days later, when the terms of the handwritten instruction required him to begin the verification process. That had been 9 months ago. 9 months of Solomon working with Yvette, with court archivists in Chatham County, with a forensic document examiner in Atlanta named Dr. Paul Ebersole to verify the authenticity of the letter, confirm Lionel Maddox was of sound mind when he wrote it, and prepare the document for submission to the probate court as a supplement to the existing estate filings. 9 months during which the Maddox family legal team had been told only that a fiduciary review was pending. 9 months during which Catherine had been told nothing specific at all. The letter directed $120 million of the trust's liquid assets to be transferred into a newly created charitable fund for affordable housing construction in 3 Georgia counties: Liberty, Bryan, Long. Counties where Lionel Maddox had, in the late 1980s and early 1990s, purchased land from families who did not fully understand what they were selling, displaced communities that had been rooted there for generations, and built shopping centers and office parks he later sold at enormous profit. The letter named the communities, named the streets, described in Lionel's own handwriting what had been there before he arrived and what he had put in its place. It was not a confession, not an apology. It was a correction, written by a man whose body was failing but whose memory remained exact. Solomon had spent 9 months making certain that no attorney, no beneficiary, and no court could argue otherwise. He could not tell Catherine any of this. The fiduciary review was sealed. The letter's contents were under a confidentiality order until the probate judge scheduled the formal hearing. And Catherine Maddox, who had spent 9 months growing frustrated by delays she could not understand, had no idea that those delays were standing in front of her in a parking lot, holding a set of keys and saying nothing. Yvette called on a Thursday evening, 3 weeks after the accident. Solomon was standing in his kitchen holding the tuning fork. He had not struck it, just turning it in his fingers, feeling the weight, the smooth taper of the tines. Iris was in the living room arranging couch cushions into a structure she called a practice stage, because she had recently decided she wanted to play an instrument but had not yet chosen which one. She had spent 2 evenings auditioning candidates by watching videos on Solomon's phone and rating each instrument on criteria she invented herself. How loud it was, whether it could be played sitting on the floor, whether the player had to close their eyes. "She is going to find out who you are before the hearing," Yvette said. Solomon set the tuning fork back on the windowsill. "I know," he said. "You could request an expedited hearing. Achebe would probably grant it given the circumstances. Ebersole's final authentication report is not ready until the 14th. If I go in without it, their attorneys challenge the letter's validity, claim diminished capacity, and the whole thing stalls for another 6 months. Maybe longer. And if she connects you to the estate before then she connects me. The letter does not change." There was a pause on the line. In the living room, Iris was testing the acoustics of her cushion stage, 1 clap, then 2, then a hum that was not any particular note, but that she held with the sustained commitment of a person who believed she was discovering something important. "You are a stubborn man, Solomon Price." Solomon. "I am a thorough man," he said. "Stubborn is what people call thorough when they want you to go faster." 2 weeks later, on a Tuesday morning in October, Solomon walked into the Chatham County Probate Court at 9:15. He carried the manila envelope, a binder containing Dr. Ebersole's completed forensic authentication report, and a court filing prepared by Yvette requesting the letter be admitted as a testamentary supplement to the Maddox estate. He wore a gray suit, the same one he wore to every court appearance, and a tie Iris had chosen that morning. Dark blue with a pattern she described as tiny boxes. They were actually small diamonds. Catherine Maddox was already inside. Seated in the second row with 2 attorneys from Wentworth and Ferris, and a woman Solomon recognized as the Maddox Foundation's executive director, Patricia Hess, tall, reading glasses on a chain around her neck. She had been with the foundation since its incorporation. Catherine wore a navy suit, her hair pulled back. She was reviewing a document on her phone and did not look up when Solomon entered. Judge Dawn Achebe called the matter at 9:32. Solomon approached the petitioner's table, placed the binder flat on the surface, opened the manila envelope, and removed the letter, still in its sealed protective sleeve, and set it beside the binder with the care of a person handling something that could not be replaced. Catherine looked up, looked at Solomon, looked at his hands on the table, at the gray suit, at his posture, and then her face did something the attorneys beside her did not immediately understand. It closed, not in anger, in recognition. She knew him, not his name, not his work, not the 9 months he had spent guarding her father's last wish. She knew his stillness, the way he stood, which was exactly the way he had stood in the parking lot 5 weeks earlier, hands at his sides, eyes steady, mouth holding nothing that needed to be said. "Your Honor," Solomon said, "my name is Solomon Price. I am a court-appointed fiduciary managing the supplemental testamentary materials of the late Lionel Andrew Maddox. I am submitting for the court's review a handwritten letter authored by Mr. Maddox 11 days prior to his death, authenticated by forensic document examiner Dr. Paul Ibersole of Atlanta, and verified by co-fiduciary Yvette Simmons of Charleston, South Carolina. The letter meets the statutory requirements for a testamentary supplement under Georgia Code Section 53-420. Judge Achebe accepted the filing, asked if the Maddox Estates legal team had received the required 14-day sealed notice. Solomon confirmed they had. Catherine's lead attorney, a man named Whitfield, stood and requested a continuance. Judge Achebe denied it. The letter would be read into the record as submitted. The clerk, a woman in her 60s who had been reading documents into court records for longer than most of the attorneys in the room had been practicing, picked up the protective sleeve, removed the letter, and began. The room went silent for the 4 minutes it took to read Lionel Maddox's handwriting aloud. Solomon stood at the petitioner's table with his hands folded. Catherine sat in her chair. And somewhere between the second paragraph, where her father named the 3 counties and the streets that had been erased, and the 4th paragraph, where he wrote that he had waited too long to do what he should have done when he still had the power and the time to do it freely, Catherine put her hand over her mouth. She did not remove it until the reading was finished. Solomon did not look at her. He watched the clerk, waited for the final sentence. "I am asking this to be done right by someone who has no reason to do it wrong." When the clerk set the letter down, Solomon said one sentence. "He asked me to make sure it was done right. That was all." 6 words carrying the weight of 9 months, a sealed envelope, and a hospital room where a dying man chose a stranger over his own family because he understood they would try to talk him out of the only honest thing he had left. Judge Achebe scheduled the evidentiary hearing for 30 days out and adjourned. Catherine did not speak to Solomon in the courtroom, did not speak to him in the hallway. She walked out between her 2 attorneys, Patricia Hess 3 steps behind, and got into the back seat of a black Escalade waiting at the curb. The door shut. The vehicle pulled into traffic and turned south toward the bridge to Isle of Hope. She did not go to her office, did not go to the foundation. She went home. To the house her father built when she was 9. The house where he made coffee every morning in a percolator she always told him was outdated. She stood in his kitchen with both hands on the marble counter, and she did not move for a long time. She thought about the parking lot, the phone she had raised to record a man's face, the word courier, the private investigator, the flagged license plate, the letter she wrote to building management about a man whose truck she found offensive. She thought about the hospital room where her father lay dying and asked a chaplain to find a stranger because he could not ask his own daughter to do the thing that mattered most. She did not cry. Not yet. That would come later, and when it did, it would not be about Solomon. It would be about her father, the distance he had kept, the fact that he had been right to keep it because she would have fought him. She would have hired attorneys, called it dementia or duress or undue influence. She would have done exactly what her legal team was now preparing to do. She knew it, and knowing it was the part she could not sit with comfortably. She was not ready to understand all of it. She was only ready to understand that she had been wrong about one man in one parking lot, and that being wrong about one man in one parking lot was not a single mistake. It was the visible edge of something much larger she had never been asked to look at. Solomon picked Iris up from school at 3:15. She was wearing the backpack with the whale patch and carrying a piece of construction paper covered in dried glue and glitter. She called it a map of the ocean. The glitter was mostly on the left side, in a region she had labeled the deep part in green crayon. "Daddy, why do maps not show the underneath part?" she asked, climbing into the booster seat. Solomon buckled her in, looked at the map, turned it over as if checking for additional information. Turned it back. "Because the underneath part keeps changing," he said. "So they would have to keep making new maps?" "Yeah, they would." She held the map against her chest and thought about this with the sustained concentration of a person encountering a problem for the first time that adults had long ago stopped trying to solve. "That sounds like a lot of work," she said. "It is," he said. He started the truck. The engine turned over on the second try, the way it always did. He pulled out of the school lot and drove west toward Wilshire Road with the windows cracked and the construction paper ocean crackling quietly against his daughter's jacket. Yvette called that evening after Iris was asleep. Solomon was at the kitchen sink, holding the tuning fork, not striking it, just turning it in his fingers the way he did when he was thinking about something he was not yet ready to say. "You did good today, Saul. I did what Lionel asked me to do, same thing." He could hear her pouring something on her end of the line. Tea, probably. She drank rooibos after 9. "How is the truck?" she asked, still dented. She laughed. He almost did. The commendation arrived 2 weeks later. A letter from Judge Achebe's office copied to the State Fiduciary Licensing Board, noting Solomon's diligence, professionalism, and adherence to the court's confidentiality protocols under what it described as unusually complex and sensitive circumstances. He read it standing at his desk on Bull Street, folded it along its original creases, and placed it in the second drawer of the filing cabinet, between a copy of his original appointment letter and a photograph of Nadine holding Iris at 4 months old. Both of them squinting in the sun outside the Telfair Museum on a Saturday afternoon that felt like it had happened in a different life. Because it had. On a Saturday morning in late October, 6 weeks after the hearing, Solomon was in the front yard replacing a section of fence post that had rotted through during the summer rains. He had the old post out and the new one sitting in the hole, tamping gravel around the base with the handle of a shovel. Iris was on the porch steps with a juice box and a library book about humpback whales that she was reading upside down because she said it made the pictures look like they were swimming up instead of across. She had been on the same page for 10 minutes, which meant she was either reading very carefully or thinking about something else entirely. A car pulled up to the curb. A white sedan, not the Porsche. Catherine Maddox stepped out carrying a brown paper bag in one hand and a terracotta pot with a rosemary plant in the other. Jeans and a linen shirt. No sunglasses, which meant she had decided on the drive over that she would let him see her face. She stood on the sidewalk for a moment. Solomon straightened up from the fence post. He was holding the shovel. He set it against the fence. "I made soup," she said, "butternut, more than I can eat, and the rosemary. I had extra from my garden and thought you might want it." She held both items slightly forward. The way a person holds something when they are not sure it will be accepted, and they are prepared for it not to be. Solomon looked at the bag, the plant. Her face, which was holding very still in the way faces do when the person behind them has rehearsed this moment several times in the car. He walked to the sidewalk and took both from her. The bag was warm. "You did not have to do that," he said. "I know," she said. She did not say anything else, did not apologize, did not explain. She stood on the sidewalk with her empty hands at her sides and she waited. And waiting, for a woman who had spent her life filling every silence with action, was the most honest thing she had done in months. Iris looked up from her whale book. "That plant smells like the chicken Daddy makes," she said, not speaking to Catherine directly, speaking to the space between them the way children do when they are making an observation that belongs to no one in particular and carries no social obligation. Catherine looked at Iris, at the whale book held upside down, at the backpack on the step beside her with the sewn-on whale patch. She opened her mouth, closed it. nodded once, got back in her car, and drove away. She did not wave, did not look back. She had done what she came to do. And the rest of it, the longer reckoning that was only beginning and that would take years and would never fully complete itself, was not something she could deliver on a sidewalk in a paper bag. Solomon carried the soup inside, set it on the counter, picked up the rosemary plant and turned it slowly, looking at the roots pressing against the inside of the terracotta. Then he set it on the kitchen windowsill, next to the tuning fork. It fit there. Not perfectly. The pot was slightly too wide and it pushed the salt shaker back an inch, but it fit well enough. That night, after Iris was asleep, Solomon stood in the doorway of her room and watched her breathe. The whale book lay open on the floor beside the bed, still upside down. Pages fanned out like something resting. The construction paper ocean map was pinned to the wall above her dresser with 2 pieces of tape. One of them was already starting to peel at the corner and would need replacing by the end of the week. He did not think about the courtroom, did not think about Catherine Maddox or her father's letter or the dented tailgate he would eventually get around to having fixed at the body shop on Waters Avenue, where they knew him by name and never charged for estimates. He thought about the underneath part of the map, the part that keeps changing. The part that requires you to keep doing the work even when no one asks to see it and no one knows it is there, and the only record of it sits in a folder in a filing cabinet in a small office above a framing shop on Bull Street. He reached into the room and pulled the door almost closed, left it open just enough for the hallway light to reach the edge of her bed the way she liked it. Then he walked to the kitchen, filled the thermos for morning, set it beside the coffee maker, and turned off the light.